So what could have driven these two young men to embrace Islamic radicalism? Well, we turn to Ken Ballen for some answers. He is the president and founder of Terror Free Tomorrow and the author of Terrorists in Love, True Life Stories of Islamic Radicals. And I started by asking him what exactly causes extremism and why some people are more vulnerable than others.
Most people who join these extremist causes profess some kind of outward reason for being involved, whether it's religion or politics or oppression of their group or oppression of Muslims in this case. But often I found, after having interviewed more than 100 extremists, that masks the real reasons most people join. Most people join because of some kind of personal crisis in their life that is hidden from public view and that's often hidden from their peers as well.
Now, the older Tsarnaev brother seems to fit that profile. The younger brother, Dzhokhar, doesn't. When you look at the surface of it, this young man, he's studying, he appears to enjoy the student life in all ways. So how do you describe that? How does he suddenly go from being this ordinary young man, seemingly, to someone who can commit such a violent crime?
Well, the key word in your question, Rosemary, is appears. He appears to be going through the surface of life with everything fine. His grades were dropping rather dramatically at Dartmouth, University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth. He was obviously in some kind of turmoil. His family was in turmoil. How deep that turmoil ran, even though on the surface he appeared to be healthy and normal and just like every other young man, he wasn't. And whether from the influence of his brother or otherwise, he pushed into this cause, this radical Islamic ideology, which provides an all-encompassing answer for these young men. And I've seen very so-called normal young men who join and get swept up into this, and suddenly their lives have meaning when before they felt it had none.
And what we're finding here is friends, relatives, neighbours, classmates, they're in shock, disbelief.
They're in shock.
They can't believe. Is that always the story? As you mentioned, you've interviewed more than 100 radical Islamists, and is this the usual story?
You know, it surprisingly often happens just this way, and I profile these fellows in my book, and their parents don't know, and their peers don't know, and their teachers don't know, and all of a sudden they get wrapped up into this world, which is a secretive world, a world where they feel themselves having meaning in their lives. And this age of young men from 16 to 30 is an age of great crisis, searching for sexual identity, searching for companionship, trying to succeed and having the pressures of life. And it's a very vulnerable age, and this is the age in which these young men join and take to this cause, and take to this cause sometimes violently.
And you're saying, you're using the word join there, so you're getting the sense that these two young men are not self-radicalized, that they are perhaps something or part of a bigger group that's moving in this direction?
Usually that's the way it works. That, if you ask me, Rosemary, what surprised me about these two young men, if it turns out at the end of this investigation, at the end of everything, that they had no contact with other people, there weren't other individuals, whether at a mosque or at a training camp or somewhere, that helped their radicalization process, I would be surprised. I think very few people entirely self-radicalize over the internet. They can do it to some degree, but I think there are other people. Usually it is some kind of a group phenomenon, and you're a part of a group.
Okay, so just finally, what is the best way for the United States, and indeed other nations that are dealing with this problem, how do they approach this type of radicalism? What do they do to stop that trigger going off?
I think the best approach, obviously the answers have to come from the Muslim community itself, but beyond that, the way the United States and other nations can really help is to expose the myth, expose the corruption, expose the ideological bankruptcy of this movement. Because I also interviewed many young men and older men who left the movement, who quit the radical cause. And the reason they quit is because of the corruption. For example, one of the people that inspired these two Tsarnaev brothers allegedly was Anwar al-Awlaki, the Yemeni cleric who the United States killed in Yemen. in 2011 with a drone strike. Now, if the United States had devoted more effort to exposing the fact that this man, Anwar al-Awlaki, was arrested on 3 separate occasions for soliciting prostitutes in San Diego in the United States, that would have done more, arguably, to blunt the cause of radicalism and discredit this man who violated Islamic precepts in the eyes of vulnerable young men like the Tsarnaev brothers. Maybe they wouldn't have followed Anwar al-Awlaki if the fact of his corruption and duplicity and his moral bankruptcy had been exposed.
And you can read Ken Ballen's latest blog, The Appeal of Islamic Radicalism, on CNN.com.